this is Nina. Welcome to NV Fine Art Studio. Today I want to show you an example of how to interpret the scene to tell a story. In particular, how to use the tonal values range in foreground, midground and background, so they create an illusion of a three-dimensional scene with a focal point. This topic is a part of my course that I'm working on and planning to make available for you guys in a month's time. It will include composition, values, color harmony, wet-on-to-wet, brushwork and many more. I will be explaining not just theory, but why it is important and how to apply it to photos, plein air, to real-life scenes. Things like interpreting a scene take years to master, but as soon as you know, it's like someone hit a light button in a dark room. For example, most of the time you cannot just take a photo and paint it all as is. It will not look like a painting, it will not look like an art that you can hang on a wall. This was the biggest struggle for me personally, to make a painting look like a work of art. But step by step, I slowly started to realize that you almost have to close your eyes on what is in front of you and let your painting tell you what to do. You have probably heard this phrase before, but no one ever actually explains how to do it, because this is the only thing that differs your work from any great artist, the artistic interpretation. So, in this tutorial, I will demonstrate you how to tell your painting to do the talking. Just a reminder that if you want to see full demonstrations and be part of my private Facebook group, please find me on Patreon. Without further ado, let's begin. We usually start painting from light to dark, and this is due to transparent nature of watercolor. So, my first wash is the lightest values, ranging in between 1 and 4. So my goal is to cover pretty much everything what we see on the paper. But I have to pay particular attention to the areas that are not going to be covered with the following washes, such as skies and the foreground. If your painting is not about skies, you have to keep the skies as simple as possible. Otherwise, they will attract too much attention and they will confuse the viewer. And this is exactly what I've just done in my painting. A little bit of warmth to the horizon and a little bit of cool tones closer to us. I am continuing with the warm tones for the objects on the left and on the right to ensure the color harmony in my painting. Now the foreground. The purpose of the foreground is to lead the viewer's eye to the focal point. And this is exactly how we should paint it. First of all, we have to ensure it creates depth in the painting. So, we will make the area further away from us lighter and the area closer to us darker. Secondly, we need to add something obvious that will lead the viewer's eye into the painting. I'm making a few washed out lines that represent tire marks on the road. At this stage, we're completely done with the light values, so let's proceed to the next step. The next step is to paint middle and darker values. The tonal values is a huge topic, so let's focus today only on how to paint middle ground and background in order to tell a story. We already painted the foreground, and we used visual language to lead the viewer into the painting. Now we need to tell the viewer why we invited them. So, the midground. This is usually where the focus of attention is. To tell visually that this is the focus of attention, we need to keep the greatest contrast in this area. So, if you want a highlight in this area, it's best to be paper white, or white gouache if you missed a few. If you want the darkest darks, it's best if it's right out of the tube neutral tint. It is a little bit exaggerated. You don't always need a full spectrum of values. But whatever you have in your focal point should be the widest range. In all other areas, you have to keep it much more muted. Doing it this way, you clearly separating the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. In my painting, the midground is the building on the left, and this is the focal point, the actors, and when I say the actors, I mean the cars and the people, and the building and the tree on the right hand side. And this is where I plan to keep the fullest range of values. This building that I'm painting at the moment is the focal point, so I'm planning to have the highest contrast in this building. My first wash, the lightest values, are ranging from 1 to 3, and I ensure that the middle values are at least 2 or 3 steps higher. So I'm painting the shadows in value 6, and I'm quickly adding the darks wet into wet, and sometimes I'm doing dry brush marks, and they are in value 8 to 9. When you paint your focal point, it is crucial that you have 2 or 3 steps in between the values. The lightest values will shine, the middle values will show the shape of the object, and the presence of darks will bring it forward. To keep your focal point interesting, it is also important to vary your brush marks. It's quite important to have wet into wet soft edges, hard edges when you paint wet into dry, and dry brush marks. Also, it's quite important to simplify, besides that it's focal point. Keep your attention on crucial parts and also don't be too careful with things. For example, you obviously understand that this is a building, but besides the shape of the roof, there is nothing that is literally painted as a part of a building. No perfect windows, no perfect doors, no columns, no balconies. Just suggestions of some details that all together read as a building. And this is our focal point. It is attacked with all my might and strength. So, when we go to the background, we have to simplify even more. We will have to completely forget what is there in real life. Squint our eyes and paint half blind. For example, we have a tree behind this building, and I am reading it as a part of background. So instead of painting a tree in green, I'm actually painting just some kind of shape that would represent a tree, and I'm using a warm gray. And it is one step lighter than the shadow on the building. There is a little house behind this tree, and the only thing I'm doing is changing the tone of the paint to indicate this house. And then I'm connecting everything to the trees in the distance. If you compare it to the photograph, it is on purpose much lighter and cooler to push it back, and everything is painted as one shape. Just to add a bit of volume to the background, I'm very gently introducing darker value, but it's only a half step difference. Now I'm connecting the background to the middle ground, and this is a very important step to keep your painting unified. I'm avoiding painting over the roofs and bonnets of the cars to leave white highlights. They are part of the middle ground, and I want a wider variety of the tonal values here. Now I'm halfway to the middle ground, so I'm introducing a proper middle value tone. It is probably 6 to 7. Because I'm painting the shadow part of the scene, I'm doing it wet into wet to have a nice and soft connection to the background. Then, without any hesitation or paying much attention to the details, I'm moving on to the house. The only thing that is defined here is the roof and the edge of the veranda. It has a little highlight here, and I believe it is important to keep it. due to, firstly, this is the middle ground and we want some of the details showing, and secondly, it is a nice diagonal and leads your eye into the painting. Because this is a shadow part, I am applying darkest darks in value 8 and 9, wet into wet, and I'm not waiting for the middle values to dry. Now it's time to pay some respect to the actors on the stage. I'm introducing values 7 to 8, borderline middle and darks, to the cars and the people. This is important to have a good contrast here, so I'm avoiding painting over the highlights on the roofs and bonnets of the cars, but making sure the wheels and shadows under the cars are very dark. The shadow under the cars must be connected to the wheels. This is what grounds them to the road and makes them look real. In terms of people, it is important to make them look like they are moving. To do so, we need to throw them out of balance. Make the bodies lean left or right. In terms of the contrast, I am leaving white highlights on people's heads and shoulders. And similar to the cars, I am connecting them to their shadows. As you may notice, I am not painting everything in one value. The further away objects are slightly lighter and closer to us slightly darker. Visually, darker objects appear closer to us. Also, I'm making the lower parts of the cars and people darker than the upper parts. Now I'm connecting everything to the big shadow on the road. Because I'm using dry brush technique, this paint will dry very quickly, so I left the foreground car to the last to paint. Because I really wanted a seamless connection in between the car and the shadow. While the big shadow and the foreground car are still damp, I introduce the darker value to this wash. And this is again to make sure it treats as a middle ground with higher contrast. But I'm not going anywhere near the very foreground, as it would be a mistake. It will attract unnecessary attention and it will be distracting from the focal point and the actors on the stage. I decided to give a bit of a color to the scene and dress the guy in the focal area in red. While I painted the electricity poles and electricity wires, the traffic lights, etc., I actually changed my mind and made this guy cycling a bicycle. Around the corner there is Maylin Road, and it is one of the oldest shopping strips in Melbourne. It is very common for gathering cyclists for a morning coffee before or after a ride, so I thought he would be a very appropriate addition to the scene, to the focal point on a bicycle in a red jersey. Hope this was informative. If you want to see more, please hit that like button, subscribe and share. It will help my channel to grow and deliver you more great content. This is it for today. I will see you in my next video. Happy painting!